Howdy and welcome to Chapter 11. Today we're going to talk about separating and retaining employees. Every organization recognizes that it needs satisfied, loyal customers. In addition, success requires satisfied, loyal employees. Retaining employees helps retain customers and increase sales. So organizations with low turnover and satisfied employees tend to perform better. There are two types of turnover, involuntary and voluntary. Involuntary is initiated by the employer, and this is often employees who prefer to stay, versus voluntary is initiated by the employee, and oftentimes the organization would prefer they did not leave. So organizations have to try to ensure that the good performers want to stay with the organization, and that employees whose performance is low are encouraged or forced to leave. So these are both challenges that involve employee turnover or employees leaving the organization. So typically the employees who leave voluntarily are either the worst performers who quit before they're fired, or the best performers who can easily find attractive new opportunities. So it's very important that human resource management can help the organization minimize both of these types of turnover. But when turnover is necessary, HRM needs to establish policies and procedures to make sure that it's being carried out effectively and will not violate company policy or law. So when we talk about turnover, we want to talk about employee perception, because employee perception is very important. So we want employees to perceive that this whole system is being done fairly. And this is why organizations develop a standardized, systematic approach to discipline and discharge. Okay, and policies are often based on principles of justice. What this means is that the employee has to perceive that this is done fairly. So it has outcome fairness, that the consequences given fit whatever happened in the situation. Okay, and then employees perceive there to be procedural justice, or the methods that were used to determine the consequences were fair. And lastly, interactional justice is where the organization carries out the actions, the discipline or discharge, in ways that take the employee's feelings into account. Because when these things are done, it's a good idea to not be personal about it, and to allow the employee to have as much dignity and say in the situation as possible. So when we terminate or when there is turnover, we have to be concerned about legal requirements. We don't want to be sued for wrongful discharge. And I think we talked about wrongful discharge before, where there may be an implied agreement where the employer had promised some kind of job security, or some kind of, perhaps the action is inconsistent with company rules, and the employee can claim they were discharged wrongfully. I can't violate public policy. We can't terminate someone for refusing to do something illegal or unsafe, or we can't terminate someone because they're a whistleblower, or they go to jury duty. Things like that are public policy. We also have to make sure we're not discriminating. We have to make decisions without regards to a person's protected status. And this is why carefully documented discipline avoids discrimination claims. So that's very important in these situations. We have to be concerned with an employee's privacy. We want to make sure that the information that we're gathering is relevant for this particular discipline. Otherwise, we will be guilty of invading someone's privacy. Privacy issues concern an employer's wish to search and monitor employees. These things need policies and procedures. Employers have to protect the information and only allow those who have a need to know to be privy to this information. Then if we're going to lay off a large number of people, the organization may have to comply with WARN, or the Workers Adjustment, Retraining, and Notification Act. This is a law that states that organizations that have 100 or more employees have to give 60 days notice before closing or laying off 50 or more full-time employees. So this concerns either a massive layoff or a plant closing, and says that an employer has to give notice. If the employer doesn't give the 60-day notice, they have to compensate the employees for any time less than 60. So progressive discipline is used in order to make sure that the justice of the situation is what it should be, as well as trying to put in a system that works for the employee and tries to make them better if something's wrong. So we want to avoid turnover. So one method is called the hot stove rule, and it's sort of an analogy with a hot stove. So this principle says that, like a hot stove, that employees should be given clear warning and following up with consistent, objective, and immediate consequences. So what that means is that, think of a hot stove. The glowing or burning stove gives warning not to touch. Anyone who ignores the warning is burned. The stove has no feelings to influence which people it burns and delivers the same burn to any person, and it's immediate. So this is sort of a guideline for progressive discipline. And this shows a progressive discipline system where at the first step, let's say an employee is late or they're absent or they do something that's unsafe in the workplace. They would be given a verbal warning, okay, where they're just talked to. Then they'd be given a written warning, then a second warning, and then if it happens again, they would be suspended, and then lastly, termination. So this allows many steps at which point gives an employee the opportunity to look at the situation and correct the problem, okay, and it provides a situation that's consistent for all employees, which is very important. So there are some options called alternative dispute resolution, and sometimes it's easier to solve problems with an impartial person or somebody comes in and kind of looks at the situation. So an open door policy just means that different levels of management in an organization have a policy where employees can come in and talk to them about anything. Then there's peer review. This is a situation where a company has a panel composed of representatives from the organization at the same level as the person in the dispute. So the case is heard before this panel and decided. Mediation is a non-binding process in which a neutral person from outside the organization hears the case and then tries to help the people arrive at a settlement. So it's non-binding. Okay, then arbitration is the kind of last step. And this is a binding process in which a professional arbitrator from outside the organization, could be a lawyer or a judge, hears the case and resolves it by making a decision. So companies go through these things because even when you think about arbitration is a formal process, these methods tend to be faster, simpler, and more private than allowing a lawsuit to progress. So employee assistance programs are a referral service that employees can use to seek professional treatment for problems, and this comes into the discipline process as far as maybe an employee is about to be terminated because of problems involving drug or alcohol use. Okay, so this allows an organization to incorporate the progressive discipline program with an EAP to get the employee help. Then we have outplacement counseling. This is where it's a service offered to employees who leave the organization to transition them to another job, because many employees don't really have interviewing skills or know how to put together their resume, or they're experiencing depression or other emotions. This is a way to get them help and transition into an organization where they're going to be more effective. Okay, employee engagement, and we talked a lot about employee engagement. And this is the degree to which employees are fully involved in their commitment to the job. Okay, and we talked about how surveys suggest that less than 1/3 of employees consider themselves engaged. Okay, so companies have to somehow improve these engagement levels. Okay, and we're going to talk about how that can happen. And what happens sometimes when employees aren't engaged, job withdrawal happens. This is behaviors that where the employee tries to avoid the work situation physically, mentally, or emotionally. Okay, and this is when they become disengaged with the job and that sort of thing. Okay. So some causes of job satisfaction. One is personal disposition, and research has shown some people are just negative by nature. Okay, they have negative affectivity and a negative self-evaluation, and they experience emotions differently, like anger, contempt, disgust, fear, nervousness, more than other people do. And they focus on the negative aspects of themselves and on the organization. Okay, then there are tasks and roles. If people aren't sure what their role is in the organization, or they're doing too much, they have overload, that causes job satisfaction. Negative behavior by managers and conflicts between employees. If you've ever worked anywhere, you probably experienced somebody in the workplace that kind of caused this sort of conflict. Then pay and benefits, because pay is more than just money. Pay is an indicator of status and self-worth. So an employee feels that that isn't where it should be, they're going to be dissatisfied. So what do people do when they're dissatisfied? They can do a lot of negative things and cause a lot of damage in the organization. Okay, they can engage in bringing lawsuits, lodging complaints. They can withdraw. They could do that. They could arrive late, call in sick, leave the organization. They can have a decrease in job involvement or commitment to the organization. All these things are bad for the organization. So job satisfaction, by definition, is a pleasant feeling resulting from the perception one's job fulfills or allows for the fulfillment of one's important job values. So the components are values, perceptions, and ideas of what is important. So employees are satisfied as long as they perceive that their jobs meet these important values. Okay. So to increase job satisfaction, organizations, first of all, can hire employees predisposed to being satisfied, not hiring the negative employees. We talked about how organizations do testing to determine someone's personality. Okay, we can refer the depressed people for help, send them to the EAP. We can use job design to design jobs that are meaningful. We can use the job characteristics model for that. We can reinforce shared values, encourage social support, encourage that employees talk to each other and engage in team activities inside and outside the workplace. We can set satisfactory pay levels. We can communicate pay structure and policy so people understand it and feel that it's fair. Then coworkers and supervisors are also an important part of job satisfaction. We talked about how employees don't quit companies, they quit managers and supervisors. So it's very important that this be looked at and taken into account. So most companies monitor job satisfaction, okay, because employers can retain employees if they're aware of these levels and make changes if employees are dissatisfied. And usually the way to do this is through a survey, okay. Lastly, when an employee does leave, oftentimes the Human Resource Department will conduct an exit interview. And this is an important activity. This is where the HR person will ask the leaving employee, why are they leaving? What are the problems? What changes should be considered? Because they're leaving, so they really don't have a stake in what's going on, so they're more likely to talk about it at this point. Well, that's it for Chapter 11. I have one quick quote. This is from Angelo Denisi. He was the dean of the business school when I was working at Tulane University, and he also writes HR books. That's his area. And what he said is whenever turnover occurs, voluntary or involuntary, in an organization, it's a failure of the HR system. And I want you to think about that. I mean, even if somebody comes in and they leave voluntarily, it's no fault of the organization, but it really is. I mean, perhaps it was the wrong person to hire, or they weren't retained, or given what they needed, or somebody is terminated for cause. Perhaps that wasn't handled correctly. So it's always something went wrong somewhere. So I think organizations really need to analyze these things and determine what happened in order to not have it happen again. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed chapter 11. Thank you.